7 years ago, my life was shattered in a single day, ripped apart by lies. So cruel and calculated that they left me with nothing but the cold pavement beneath my feet. I was just 22 years old, fresh out of college, trying to build a future for myself while living at home to save money. It wasn't glamorous, but it was safer, so I thought. That illusion crumbled when my sister Hannah, the golden child of the family, returned from her failed marriage armed with venomous accusations. She didn't just blame me for ruining her marriage. She convinced our parents that I had deliberately introduced her husband, Pete, to one of my friends, a woman named Emily, and orchestrated their affair. The truth: none of it happened. But in the blink of an eye, I went from being their son to being branded as a traitor, a destroyer of families. Without hesitation, my own flesh and blood turned their backs on me, kicking me out into the unforgiving night without even giving me time to process what was happening. I remember sitting on the curb outside the house where I grew up, surrounded by boxes and bags filled with whatever belongings I could hastily grab before my mother slammed the door behind me. My hands trembled as I clutched my phone, scrolling through contact after contact, hoping someone would answer. No one did. The weight of betrayal pressed down on me like a suffocating blanket. And all I could do was cry, tears streaming down my face, as the reality of my situation hit me. Here I was, barely more than a boy, cast aside like garbage because of Hannah's manipulative web of deceit. The chill of the night air seeped into my bones, but it was nothing compared to the icy isolation gnawing at my heart. How could this happen? How could the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally believe such a monstrous lie? What made everything worse was the sheer audacity of Hannah's fabrication. According to her, Emily, the friend I'd introduced to Pete under completely innocent circumstances, had seduced him, leading to their alleged affair. Every word she spoke was a dagger aimed straight at my soul. I knew Emily well enough to know she wasn't capable of something so vile. She was kind, respectful, and had her own stable relationship. And Pete. He adored Hannah. I'd seen the way he looked at her, heard the way he talked about her with admiration. The idea that he would cheat on her seemed absurd, almost laughable if it weren't tearing my world apart. Yet, despite the lack of evidence, my parents swallowed Hannah's story whole, refusing to question a single detail. After all, she was their precious daughter, the favorite child. Who cared if their son was innocent? But here's the twist. Hannah wasn't just lying about Emily and Pete. Oh no. The truth was far darker, far uglier than anyone could have imagined. Years later, I discovered that Hannah herself was the one having an affair not with Pete, but with another one of my friends, Frank. Yes, Frank. A man I barely interacted with, let alone suspected of anything untoward. Hannah had spun an elaborate tale, accusing me of introducing her to Frank and encouraging their connection because he needed her help. In reality, she used this fabricated excuse to justify her infidelity, painting herself as the victim while destroying my reputation in the process. Her emails with Frank, filled with declarations of love and plans for secret meetings, were undeniable proof of her betrayal. Worse still, she signed off on those messages with her middle name, a detail only a handful of people knew. This wasn't just a lie. It was a masterpiece of manipulation designed to protect herself at any cost, even if it meant sacrificing her own brother. Looking back, I realize how meticulously Hannah orchestrated every step of her plan. She played the role of the grieving wife to perfection, sobbing uncontrollably as she accused me of ruining her life. My parents, blinded by their unconditional love for her, never stopped to consider the possibility that she might be lying. They didn't care that I had no proof of my innocence, because they already believed the worst of me. Their decision to kick me out wasn't just cruel, it was final. There were no second chances, no opportunities to defend myself. Just a swift, merciless verdict delivered with zero compassion. That night on the curb, as cars whizzed past and strangers walked by oblivious to my despair, I felt utterly alone. The stars above seemed impossibly distant, mocking me with their indifference. I had lost everything: my family, my home, my sense of belonging, all because of a lie so twisted it defied belief. Little did I know then that this was only the beginning of a nightmare that would haunt me for years to come. Hannah's betrayal ran deeper than I ever imagined, and the scars it left would take far longer to heal. But one thing was certain: justice would eventually find its way to her doorstep. And when it did, I would make sure she paid for every tear, every sleepless night, every moment of pain she inflicted upon me. 7 years of silence, 7 years of unanswered questions. And then it happened. Dan's email landed in my inbox that would change everything. It came out of nowhere, sent by an anonymous sender who claimed to have the truth about Hannah's divorce. At first, I thought it was a prank or some cruel joke orchestrated by my sister to further torment me. But as I opened the email and began reading, my heart raced with a mix of disbelief and fury. The message contained screenshots, dozens of them, of intimate exchanges between Hannah and Frank, the man she had been secretly seeing behind Pete's back. Each word felt like a punch to the gut. Declarations of love, plans for secret meetings, and even details about how they planned to deceive everyone around them. What struck me most was the signature at the end of each email. Hannah signed off not with her first name, but with her middle name, a detail only a handful of people knew, including myself. My hands trembled as I scrolled through the evidence, piecing together the horrifying reality. Hannah hadn't just cheated on Pete. She had framed me to cover her tracks. According to the emails, she told Frank that I was complicit in their affair, claiming I had introduced them under the guise of helping his singing career. The audacity of her lies left me breathless. She had manipulated every aspect of this situation, turning me into the villain while painting herself as the victim. The email ended with a brief note from the sender, who revealed himself to be none other than Pete. He explained why he chose anonymity, admitting he didn't want to seem bitter or desperate after so many years. Yet, despite his cautious tone, the weight of his words hit me like a freight train. This wasn't just proof, it was vindication. For 7 long years, I had carried the burden of guilt thrust upon me by my own family, believing there was no way to fight back without evidence. Now, here it was, delivered straight to my inbox, undeniable and irrefutable. As I sat there, staring at the screen, a surge of emotions overwhelmed me: anger, relief, and a burning desire for justice. I realized this was my chance to confront the people who had abandoned me, to show them the monster their precious daughter truly was. Little did I know, this revelation would set off a chain reaction that would bring the entire house of cards crashing down. The day of reckoning arrived with a storm brewing in the air, both outside and within me. Armed with Pete's damning evidence, we decided to confront my family head-on. It was risky, I knew that, but after 7 years of carrying this burden, I couldn't wait another moment. Pete agreed to join me, not just as a witness, but as someone who had been wronged by Hannah's lies as much as I had. We showed up unannounced at my childhood home, where nothing seemed to have changed, except for the tension that now crackled like lightning between us. My mother answered the door, her face frozen in shock when she saw me standing there alongside Pete. Before she could even process what was happening, we stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. The living room felt suffocatingly small as my father and Hannah sat together on the couch, their expressions shifting from confusion to outright hostility the moment they recognized us. For a brief second, it almost felt surreal, like some twisted version of a family reunion. But the illusion shattered quickly when Pete placed the stack of printed emails and divorce documents on the coffee table. "This is the truth," I said, my voice steady despite the fury boiling beneath the surface. Hannah wasn't the victim, here she was the one cheating with Frank. The room fell silent except for the sound of my father's sharp intake of breath. Hannah's reaction was immediate: panic. She bolted up from the couch, muttering excuses under her breath before attempting to flee to her bedroom. But Pete stopped her cold. "Don't bother running," he snapped, his tone laced with bitterness. "You can't escape this." He held up his phone, scrolling through screenshots of her incriminating messages with Frank. Each word was a dagger, each signature bearing her middle name, a detail only a select few knew. Her face turned pale, then red with shame as my parents stared at the screen, disbelief morphing into horror. My mother gasped, clutching her chest, while my father looked like he'd been punched in the gut. "What is this?" my father demanded, his voice trembling with rage. When Hannah tried to deny everything, her lies unraveled further. Pete revealed how she had manipulated him, blaming me for introducing her to Frank and spinning tales about helping his singing career. The absurdity of it all made my blood boil. And then came the final blow. Pete explained how Hannah had sold our grandmother's diamond ring during the settlement. Something my parents never knew. That revelation hit them harder than anything else. My father's expression darkened, and without hesitation, he ordered Hannah to leave, packing her belongings himself and shoving the bags into her arms. As Hannah sobbed and begged for mercy, pleading with my parents to let her stay, I couldn't help but feel a grim sense of satisfaction. Karma had finally caught up with her, and justice tasted bitter yet sweet. The moment Hannah collapsed onto her knees, tears streaming down her face as she begged my parents to let her back into the house, was nothing short of poetic justice. It was like watching a twisted mirror image of what I had endured 7 years earlier, except this time the roles were reversed. She sobbed uncontrollably, clutching at their legs and pleading for forgiveness, claiming she couldn't survive on her own without their help. The irony wasn't lost on me. She sounded eerily similar to how I must have seemed when I was thrown out those years ago, when she convinced them I was the villain in her fabricated tale. But unlike me, who had no evidence to defend myself, Hannah now faced an avalanche of undeniable proof. Emails signed with her middle name, screenshots detailing her affair with Frank, and even Pete's testimony about her lies. Still, she refused to admit the truth, doubling down on her manipulative tactics in a desperate attempt to save herself. Watching her grovel made my blood boil, not out of anger, but because it felt so painfully familiar. My father stood there, arms crossed, his expression unreadable, until finally he snapped. "You did this to yourself," he said coldly, shoving her belongings into her trembling hands. "Leave. Now." As Hannah wailed louder, accusing him of being heartless, I couldn't help but feel a grim satisfaction. This was karma in its purest form, a cosmic payback that hit too close to home. 7 years ago, they hadn't hesitated to cast me aside based solely on Hannah's lies. Now, here she was, abandoned by the very people who once worshipped her every move. Her cries echoed through the living room, each one a reminder of the pain she had inflicted on me. But instead of guilt or pity, all I felt was vindication. Every tear she shed was earned, every plea deserved. Karma had finally come full circle, and I relished every second of it. Despite being kicked out of the house and exposed for her lies, Hannah refused to let go of her manipulative grip on me. If anything, her desperation reached new heights, turning her into a relentless force of chaos that invaded every corner of my life. Within days of her eviction, my phone began ringing incessantly, sometimes as many as 15 calls in a single hour, all from unknown numbers. At first, I thought it was just telemarketers or spam, but when I finally answered one call, I heard her voice on the other end, trembling, pleading, and dripping with fake vulnerability. "Please forgive me," she sobbed, painting herself as the victim who had been abandoned by everyone, including our parents. Her tone was calculated, designed to tug at whatever shred of guilt might still linger within me. But I wasn't falling for it, not after everything she'd done. Her harassment didn't stop there. One morning, as I prepared to leave for work, I found her waiting outside my apartment building, sitting on the steps like some tragic figure from a soap opera. When she saw me, she launched into another dramatic performance, claiming she couldn't survive without financial support because a teacher's salary wasn't enough to cover rent, utilities, and groceries. It was laughable, especially coming from someone who had spent years mooching off our parents while refusing to take responsibility for herself. I told her firmly that I wanted nothing to do with her antics. But she only grew more persistent, showing up uninvited at my workplace later that week. She even tried to charm Lisa, my insisting she only wanted peace and accusing me of holding a grudge. What infuriated me most was her audacity to play the victim card so shamelessly. Every conversation ended with her bursting into tears, blaming me for ruining her life and accusing me of being heartless. She left messages scrawled on my door in permanent marker, calling me a vengeful monster as if she were the wronged party. The irony was staggering. After all those years of tormenting me, she now expected sympathy. I blocked her number repeatedly, but somehow, she always found ways around it, choosing burner phones or having friends add me to group chats where she could ambush me again. Each attempt felt like a slap in the face, a reminder that Hannah would never change. She wasn't seeking forgiveness. She was trying to regain control, to twist the narrative back in her favor. But this time, I wasn't going to let her win. Just when I thought the chaos caused by my family had finally subsided, my parents re-entered the scene with a desperation that bordered on absurd. It all started after Liza posted our engagement announcement on social media, simple photos of us smiling together, captioned with excitement about our upcoming wedding. What I didn't expect was how this innocent post would open the floodgates for my parents. Shameless attempts to worm their way back into my life. Within days, they found me through Facebook, ironically. The same platform where Pete had discovered me on began bombarding me with messages so long and convoluted they could rival a novel. Each message carried the same tired refrain: "We made a mistake. Let's reunite as a family. And, most laughably, you're getting married. We must be there." Their audacity left me speechless. These were the same people who had thrown me out onto the street 7 years ago without a second thought, convinced by Hannah's lies that I was some kind of moral degenerate. Now, suddenly they wanted to play the role of loving parents. The hypocrisy was staggering. They even tried to frame their betrayal as an honest error, claiming they acted out of blind trust in Hannah during a difficult time. But I knew better. Their actions weren't born from love or loyalty. They were driven by convenience, favoritism, and cowardice. And now, seeing me happy and successful, they wanted to rewrite history, pretending none of the pain they inflicted ever happened. What infuriated me most was their blatant disregard for accountability. Instead of apologizing sincerely, they focused on guilt-tripping me, emphasizing their desire for family unity, while conveniently ignoring the fact that they had torn our family apart in the first place. They even went so far as to suggest we settle everything over dinner before the wedding, as if sharing a meal could erase nearly a decade of abandonment and betrayal. Every word felt like another attempt to manipulate me, to pull me back into their toxic orbit under the guise of reconciliation. Liza and I couldn't help but laugh at their delusional pleas. To them, it seemed inconceivable that I might not want them in my life anymore, that I could find happiness and fulfillment without them. But the truth was, I no longer needed their validation. Mine was my family now, and nothing, not their sob stories, their hollow promises, or their desperate attempts at manipulation, could change that. The final confrontation with Hannah came on a morning that started like any other, but quickly spiraled into chaos. As I was leaving for work, keys in hand and coffee balanced precariously in the other, I noticed her standing near my car, a desperate look in her eyes. Before I could react, she lunged forward, throwing herself onto the hood of my car with alarming force. Her weight pressed against the windshield as she screamed at me to listen, refusing to budge until I agreed to talk. My heart raced not out of fear, but from sheer frustration. This was no longer just harassment. It was an act of madness, fueled by desperation. "Get off my car!" I shouted, gripping the doorframe tightly. But Hannah didn't care about reason or logic anymore. She pounded her fists on the hood, tears streaming down her face, accusing me of being cruel and unforgiving. Passersby began to stop and stare, their phones already out recording the spectacle. It was humiliating, infuriating, and completely unnecessary. After everything she had done, after all the pain she inflicted, here she was making yet another scene, trying to paint herself as the victim once again. I'd had enough. Without hesitation, I dialed 911, explaining the situation calmly while keeping my distance. When the police arrived, they wasted no time pulling her off my car. She fought them every step of the way, screaming accusations at me, calling me a monster, and sobbing hysterically as they dragged her away. But the drama didn't end there. Later that evening, my phone buzzed incessantly with messages not from Hannah this time, but from my parents. They were furious, blaming me for being too harsh and treating Hannah unfairly. How dare I involve the police? Didn't I know she was suffering? Their texts dripped with condescension, guilt-tripping me for not showing compassion toward my own sister. The irony was staggering. They still couldn't see how toxic she was, even after everything. Instead of holding her accountable, they defended her reckless behavior, insisting I owed her forgiveness. But I wasn't falling for their manipulations anymore. I blocked their numbers without a second thought, silencing their endless stream of excuses. Enough was enough. The final chapter of this saga came with a decision that felt both liberating and inevitable. After years of enduring their toxicity, manipulation, and betrayal, I made the choice to sever all ties with my family permanently. It wasn't an impulsive decision. It was the culmination of everything they had put me through over the past 7 years. Hannah's relentless harassment, my parents' hollow attempts at reconciliation, and their refusal to acknowledge their own wrongdoings left me no other option. They had shown me time and again that they were incapable of genuine remorse or change. So, after reading yet another delusional message from them, begging for forgiveness and demanding a place in my life, even at my wedding, I sat down and typed out a response that would close this chapter once and for all. "I don't need your apologies," I wrote, my fingers trembling with a mix of anger and relief. "You lost the right to dictate anything about my life years ago, when you threw me out without a second thought. I've built a new life without you, and I don't intend to let any of you back into it." The words poured out like venom, each sentence a dagger aimed at the heart of their manipulative games. I reminded them how they had sided with Hannah despite her lies, how they had turned their backs on me during my darkest hour, and how they now expected me to forgive them simply because they decided it was convenient. "If you contact me again," I concluded, "you'll be speaking to my lawyer." With that, I hit send and immediately blocked their numbers, email addresses, and social media accounts. This time, there would be no loopholes, no burner phones, no guilt trips. I was done. Liza stood beside me as I deleted their messages one by one, her presence grounding me in the reality of what I had gained rather than what I had lost. She was my family now, only one I needed. Her unwavering support throughout this entire ordeal had been my anchor, keeping me steady when the storm of my past threatened to pull me under. Together, we laughed at the absurdity of their latest plea, marveling at how clueless they still were. Did they really think I'd forgive them after everything? Did they honestly believe I'd welcome them back into my life as if nothing had happened? The audacity was staggering, but it only reinforced my resolve. I didn't need their validation anymore. Their toxic influence had shaped too much of my life already, and I refused to let it define my future. As I closed the door on that part of my life, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. 7 years ago, I was a broken man cast aside, betrayed, and abandoned by the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. But today, I am stronger, wiser, and happier than I ever thought possible. Cutting ties with my family wasn't easy, but it was necessary. It taught me that sometimes protecting yourself means walking away from those who refuse to see your worth. My story isn't just about revenge or vindication. It's about reclaiming my freedom and finding true happiness. And so, as I look ahead to my wedding day, I do so with a sense of peace I never imagined I could feel. Liza is my partner, my confidant, and my home. She is proof that family isn't defined by blood, but by love, trust, and mutual respect. If Hannah or my parents try to reach out again, they will find themselves met with silence or worse, legal action. But deep down, I know they won't stop. People like them rarely do. And while their inability to grow or take responsibility saddens me, it also reinforces why I made the right decision. Sometimes, the hardest choices lead to the greatest freedom. For the first time in years, I feel truly alive and I owe none of it to them.